My fiancée and her entire family scammed me for 18 months to steal everything, but I secretly learned their language and heard them planning to destroy me financially. Now they're in prison and never saw their own downfall coming. I'm 28 years old, I work in tech, and for a year and a half I was engaged to a woman who, turns out, was basically executing an elaborate marriage scam along with her entire family to steal every cent I had. I know it sounds like something out of a bad movie or one of those true crime shows you watch at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep, but I swear this happened to me. And the worst part is, I was about to marry her without realizing anything until almost the very end. I should start at the beginning, I guess. I met Daria in 2021. I was 26 and she was 24. A mutual friend introduced us at one of those casual gatherings where everyone brings something to eat and they end up staying until 3 in the morning talking about anything. She was charming, you know. She had this accent that made her sound interesting. She was funny, intelligent, and she seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, and not just in my job or how much I made or things like that. We started dating casually, nothing serious at first, but things progressed naturally, and after like 6 months, we were official boyfriend and girlfriend. The truth is, my life at that time was pretty stable. I mean, I had a good job at a tech company, I was making good money for my age, I was paying for a decent apartment, and basically, I was at that point where you feel like you're finally a functional and responsible adult. Daria seemed to be in a similar situation. She worked at a beauty salon doing nails and lashes. She didn't make as much as me, but it didn't seem like she was desperate for money or anything like that. I met her family around the 3rd month. Her mom, Vera, her brother, Roman, and some uncles who came and went. All very nice at first, very welcoming. Always inviting me to family dinners where they'd prepare traditional food from their country and treated me like I was already part of the family. Looking back, I should have noticed some weird things from the beginning, but when you're in love or whatever you think is love at that moment, you basically ignore all the warning signs because you want to believe everything is fine. For example, Vera always asked a lot about my job, about exactly how much I made. And at first I thought she was just a concerned mom, wanting to make sure her daughter was with someone stable, you know? But the questions were very specific, like how much I had in my savings account, if I had access to credit, if my parents had money, things that I now realize aren't normal for a simple family conversation. After a year and a half of being together, in December 2022, I proposed to Daria. I bought a ring that cost me like $4,000, nothing extravagant but not cheap either, and I did it at a nice restaurant with a view of the river, the whole romantic package you see in movies. She said yes, obviously, and I was happy thinking I had finally found the person I was going to spend the rest of my life with. Her family threw a huge engagement party. They invited like 50 people. Most of them I didn't know, but I assumed they were their friends or extended family. And everyone congratulated me and told me I was very lucky to have Daria, and that she was a great woman. This is where things started getting weird, but again, I didn't want to see it because I was in that bubble of newlywed happiness. Like 2 weeks after the engagement, Vera suggested that Daria and I move into her house to save money for the wedding. She said something like, "Why are you going to be paying rent when you can stay here for free and save that money for the future? It makes sense, right?" And honestly, at that moment it seemed reasonable to me. I mean, her house was big. They had a full basement we could use as our space, and if I could save $1,500 a month in rent, then better. I thought we could save up a good fund for the wedding, or for a down payment on our own house eventually. I moved in January 2023. And at first, everything seemed fine. Daria and I had our space in the basement. It was like having our own small apartment inside her family's house. But after like a month, I started noticing that something didn't quite add up. Vera, Roman, and the other family members who lived there or came frequently were always speaking in their language when I was present. And don't get me wrong, I understand it's their native language and it's natural for them to speak it, but it was like they specifically waited for me to enter the room to switch from English to their language, you know what I mean? And then they'd glance at me while they talked, and I felt that paranoia of like, they're talking about me, but I told myself I was being ridiculous and paranoid. Also, they started pressuring a lot about money and the wedding. Vera insisted we had to get married quickly, like in 3 or 4 months. She'd say things like, "Why wait? You already know you love each other. Do it now before you change your minds or something happens. And Daria agreed with her, which seemed strange to me because before the engagement, she had always said she wanted a big and well-planned wedding that would take time to make everything perfect. They also started suggesting very strongly that I put Daria on my bank account as a joint holder. Vera said that way we'd be more of a real couple, that sharing finances was part of marriage, and Daria constantly asked me when we were going to do that. I made excuses. Honestly, I'd tell them I wanted to wait until after the wedding to combine accounts because that's what I'd read was more sensible. But the pressure was constant and made me uncomfortable. I also noticed that Roman was always asking to borrow money. Small amounts at first. $20 here, $50 there. Always with some excuse that he'd forgotten his wallet or needed gas urgently. And at first I'd lend it to him because I thought he'd eventually pay me back. But he never did, and after, like 3 months he'd probably gotten $500 total from me. In March, like 2 months after moving in with them, I made a decision that literally saved me from losing everything. I was increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation, with not understanding what they said when they spoke in their language, with feeling like there were secrets and conversations I was excluded from. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to learn their language. I'm not going to tell anyone, but I'm going to take classes in secret, and maybe that way I can better understand my future family and surprise Daria when I can speak with her in her native language. I found online classes I could take during my lunch hour or in the evenings when I said I had to work overtime, and I started studying seriously. I'm not going to lie, the language was difficult, very different from English, but I'm good with computers and programming languages, and it turns out that helped me understand the grammatical structure faster than normal. After like 6 weeks, I could already understand basic conversations. I couldn't respond fluently, but I could grasp the essence of what they were saying. And that's when I started hearing things that made my hair stand on end. One day in April, I was in the basement, supposedly working on my laptop, but actually doing vocabulary exercises with headphones, and I heard Vera and Daria talking upstairs in the kitchen. Not shouting, but talking loud enough to be heard through the floor. Vera was telling Daria something about the timeline, about how they needed to move faster because I was taking too long to give them access to the accounts, and Daria responded something like, "I know, Mom, but I can't pressure him too obviously, or he's going to suspect. Give me a little more time." And Vera responded, "We don't have more time. You've been with him almost 2 years, and we've barely gotten anything. This isn't efficient. Look at your cousin who finished her job in 6 months and left with everything." I froze listening to this. Like I literally felt like they'd thrown cold water on me, because in that moment, I understood I was hearing something I shouldn't hear, but desperately needed to hear. I kept listening, and Daria said, "He's smarter than the others. I have to be more careful. But I almost have him where I want him. After the wedding, it'll be easy." Vera asked if I had made the will, she'd suggested, and Daria said, "Not yet, but she was going to convince me soon." In that moment, I honestly thought I was going to throw up. I mean, my brain was trying to process what I'd just heard, and part of me still wanted to believe I'd misunderstood something, that my level of language comprehension wasn't sufficient, and I'd misinterpreted the conversation. But I hadn't misunderstood anything, honestly. And the worst part is, the suspicious conversations continued in the following days, and I kept hearing and understanding them more and more. I decided I needed concrete evidence, because if this was what I thought it was, I needed proof to protect myself legally and maybe even criminally. I bought one of those small digital recorders on Amazon, the kind journalists or students use to record lectures. It cost me like $70, and I hid it in the living room where the family frequently gathered in the evenings. A week later, in May, I recorded what ended up being the evidence that changed everything. It was a Friday night. I'd supposedly gone out to meet work friends for some beers, but actually I left and stayed waiting at a cafe near the house for an hour before returning without warning. When I entered the house, I heard loud voices coming from the living room. It was Daria, Vera, and Roman having a heated argument, and I stayed in the hallway near the basement door where they couldn't see me, but I could hear everything perfectly, and the recorder I'd hidden under the couch was capturing everything. Vera was furious. You could hear it in her voice even though they were speaking in their language. She was saying things like, "This idiot should have already put your name on everything. You should already have access to his bank accounts. What are you waiting for?" And Daria responded, yelling too. "It's not that easy, Mom. He's careful with his money. He's not like the others who were stupid. I have to do it gradually." Roman intervened, saying something about how he already had another prospect, basically another victim, and that maybe they should let this one go and start with someone easier. But Vera said no, that I had too much money and good income to let go, that they had to finish it. The conversation continued, and they basically admitted everything. They talked about how they'd done this before with other men, how it was a family operation where Daria and her cousins would attract men with good jobs, marry them or at least get engaged, gain access to their finances, and then drain everything they could before, disappearing. Vera specifically mentioned 3 or 4 names of previous men, amounts of money they'd obtained ranging from $30,000 to $120,000, and methods they'd used, including opening credit accounts in the victims' names, transferring money to accounts abroad, and even selling some of these men's belongings. I felt like I was in an episode of a true crime show, but being the victim myself, you know? My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. My hands were sweating and shaking, and all I could think was, I have to get out of here. I have to get out of this house now. But I forced myself to stay still and keep listening, because I knew I needed all the information possible before making any move. After like half an hour, the argument ended, and I quickly went down to the basement and acted like I'd just arrived. I went up and said, "Hello," like nothing. And they all smiled at me and asked how I'd been with my friends, acting like they hadn't been planning to rob me literally 10 minutes before. That night I couldn't sleep. Obviously, I stayed awake next to Daria, this woman I'd planned to spend my life with, this woman I thought loved me. And all I could think was how many of our interactions had been fake, how much of what I'd lived in the last year and a half had been an elaborate act. The next day I waited for everyone to leave the house. I recovered the recorder from its hiding place in the living room and took it to work with me. I had a coworker named Emma, who happened to speak the same language as Daria and her family. She was from a neighboring country, and although I'd never mentioned anything to her about my situation because I didn't want to mix my personal life with work, at that moment, I had no choice. I needed someone else to hear the recording and confirm I wasn't going crazy or misinterpreting everything. I asked Emma if I could talk to her privately during lunch. We went to my car in the parking lot, and I told her, "Look, I need you to listen to this and tell me exactly what they're saying. I know it's weird, but it's important. Please." She agreed, though she looked confused, and I played the recording. Emma listened with an increasingly serious and worried expression, and when the most incriminating part ended, she turned to me and said, "Jason, these people are planning to rob you. They're talking about a marriage scam. They mention other victims. This is serious. This is criminal." Emma was incredibly kind and helpful. She helped me translate and transcribe the most important parts of the recording. She explained all the cultural context I didn't fully understand, and she advised me to go immediately to the police and to my family. I called my parents, Joseph and Barbara, who lived in another state, and explained the whole situation to them. They were obviously horrified and furious. My dad immediately said, "Get out of that house right now. Come here, or we'll come get you. Don't spend one more night there." That same night, after work, I didn't return to Vera's house. Instead, I went to my old apartment, where fortunately, I still had some things stored in a storage unit. I recovered what I could and drove 6 hours to my parents' house. I sent Daria a text message saying only, "I'm not coming back. I know everything. Don't try to contact me." She immediately started calling me like crazy, like 20 calls in an hour, text messages asking what I was talking about, to come back, that we needed to talk, but I didn't respond to anything. The next day, my dad and I went to the local police station and reported everything. The officer who attended to us was named Harold, a guy about 50 years old who'd seen everything in his career, and when he heard my story and the recording Emma had helped translate, his expression got very serious and he told me, "Son, you're lucky you got out when you did. We've seen cases like this before and they usually don't end well for the victims." He explained to me that this type of organized marriage scams are more common than people think, especially with criminal groups operating between countries where it's easier to disappear with the money. Harold helped me file a formal complaint. He put me in contact with the FBI because the scam crossed state lines and possibly international ones. And he advised me to immediately review all my bank accounts, my credit, and any legal documents to make sure they hadn't done anything without my knowledge. I spent the next few days basically auditing my entire financial life, and fortunately, because I'd never given them access to my main accounts, they hadn't been able to do much damage. But I did discover some disturbing things. Turns out Roman had tried to open a credit card in my name using information he'd probably obtained from my documents that were in the basement, but the application had been rejected because the address didn't match my history. I also found that they'd tried to get me to sign some documents that supposedly were for wedding planning, but were actually to establish me as a guarantor for a loan. But since I always read everything before signing, and those documents seemed suspicious to me, I never signed them, and now I understood why Vera had gotten so upset when I refused. The police investigation expanded rapidly when Harold shared the information with other agencies. Turns out there were other similar complaints in different states, like 5 or 6 men who had reported similar situations with women matching the descriptions of Daria and her cousins, and when police finally searched Vera's house with a court order, they found massive evidence of an organized criminal operation. There were folders with detailed information about multiple victims, falsified documents, records of money transfers to accounts abroad, and even a kind of manual or guide on how to execute the scam more effectively. The arrests started in June 2023. Vera, Roman, Daria, and 3 more people from their extended family who were involved were arrested in a coordinated operation. Daria tried to contact me from jail. She sent me letters saying everything was a misunderstanding, that she really loved me, that her family had forced her to do all this, but I didn't respond to anything because I knew it was just another manipulation trying to get me to withdraw my testimony, or maybe send them money for bail or something like that. The legal process took like 8 months. It was complicated because there were victims in different states, and some of the crimes had occurred years ago, so there were problems with jurisdiction and statute of limitations, and a bunch of legal things I honestly didn't fully understand, but basically meant the lawyers had to work very hard to build a solid case. I had to testify twice, once at a preliminary hearing and another at the actual trial, and it was horrible having to see Daria, in court, sitting there in her prison uniform, looking at me like I was the villain of this story. The prosecutor presented evidence of at least 9 confirmed victims over a 5-year period, with total losses of more than $500,000. Some of those men had literally lost all their savings, their homes, had been left with enormous debts, and one of them had even attempted suicide after discovering everything had been a lie. Hearing those testimonies was devastating, because I realized I could easily have been one of them if I hadn't decided to learn the language and discover the truth when I did. In February 2024, the verdicts came out. Vera was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and other charges. Roman got 10 years, Daria got 8 years, and the other family members received sentences between 3 and 6 years, depending on their level of participation. Additionally, they all faced deportation after serving their sentences because several of them were in the country on visas that were obviously revoked after the criminal convictions. Now, a year and a half after all that, I'm basically rebuilding my life from scratch, emotionally speaking. Financially, I'm fine. I didn't lose much money thanks to discovering everything in time, but the emotional and psychological part has been very difficult. I went to therapy for like 6 months because I developed serious trust issues, paranoia about people's intentions, and terrible anxiety every time someone asked me about my work or my finances, even in completely normal contexts. I've started dating someone new about 3 months ago, a woman named Sarah I met through mutual work friends, and she's very patient with me and all my emotional baggage from the situation with Daria. I told her the whole story on our 3rd date because I felt it was fair for her to know why I'm so cautious and why I might react strangely to certain things, and she was very understanding and told me she completely understood and that we'd go at my pace without pressure. I learned a lot from this horrible experience. I guess I learned that warning signs exist for a reason, and you shouldn't ignore them just because you want to believe everything is fine. I learned it's okay to be cautious with your personal and financial information, even with people you love or think you love. I learned that if something feels wrong or uncomfortable, there's probably a reason for it, and you should investigate more instead of just ignoring that instinct. I also learned, And this sounds cliche, but it's true, that real family and friends are the ones who are there when everything falls apart. My parents dropped everything and came to support me without asking questions or judging me for being so naive. Emma, my coworker, helped me without thinking twice, even though it meant getting involved in a complicated and potentially dangerous legal situation, and my friends from work and college stayed in touch with me throughout the legal process, even though I'd basically disappeared from their lives during the time I was with Daria. Sometimes, I still think about how different everything could have been if I hadn't decided to learn that language, if I hadn't heard that specific conversation, if I'd married Daria without knowing anything. I'd probably be financially ruined right now, maybe with massive debts, maybe without a home, definitely without the savings it took me years to accumulate. And the worst part is, I probably never would have known the complete truth. I would have thought I'd just chosen the wrong partner or that the marriage hadn't worked out, without realizing that everything from the beginning had been a calculated and orchestrated lie. The last time I heard anything about Daria was like 4 months ago. I received a letter from her from prison, again trying to convince me that she'd really developed feelings for me despite everything, that the scam had started as a job, but she'd eventually truly fallen in love. I don't know whether to believe her or not. Honestly, I don't care anymore, because even if a small part of that were true, it doesn't change the fact that she lied to me from day one, that she was willing to destroy my financial and emotional life for money, and that if they hadn't caught her, she probably would have done it without remorse. I threw that letter in the trash and moved on with my life, because that's all you can do after something like this, you know? You can't stay trapped in the past or in what could have been. You have to learn the lessons, protect yourself better in the future, and eventually open yourself again to the possibility of trusting someone, even though it's terrifying. And that's what I'm trying to do now with Sarah, taking it day by day, being honest about my fears and insecurities, and hoping this time is different, that this time, it's real.